Hey, welcome back everyone. On the last video, I talked about 3 tree species that I considered the most overrated for whitetails. Now those weren't bad tree species by any means. They're just some that I think are overrated. And I do think there's better species, which is what we're going to get into today. So now I'm going to introduce you to my 3 favorite trees for whitetail habitat projects. And I'm going to give them to you in reverse order. So make sure you stick around to the end to hear what I think is the #1 tree for whitetail land managers. My 3rd favorite tree for whitetail land management projects is the Chinese chestnut. In our last video, I talked about the Dunstan chestnut and how some experts believe it is really a Chinese chestnut. Well, you can save a lot of money by just buying Chinese chestnuts. I have them growing on my farm, and I'm telling you, the deer and other wildlife come to them as fast as those nuts fall. They clean them up. A couple of things to remember about the Chinese chestnut. First, they produce at a fairly young age. I've got nuts on trees that are 5 years old, which is a great thing for the wildlife land manager. Chestnuts do not like wet feet. You need to plant them on a drier site instead of a wetter site. And they like soil that is highly acidic. So keep that in mind. They need a lower pH and they'll do very well. So my 2nd most favorite tree for whitetail habitat projects is the pear. You know, in my last video, I talked about how I thought apples were overrated. Now granted, deer sure do love apples, but they like pears even more. Pears are more disease resistant, they're easier to grow, they produce a bumper crop a lot quicker than an apple tree will. In my experience, pears far outshine apple trees when it comes to producing mast for whitetails. So one thing to keep in mind with pear trees is that different varieties have different ripening times. One of my favorite pears is the Kiefer pear. It is a later ripening variety that has done fantastic on my whitetail habitat projects. Now for my all-time favorite whitetail tree. Without a doubt, that favorite tree for me is the American Persimmon. Deer absolutely love persimmons. For those of you who are not familiar with persimmons, persimmon tree produces a small orange round fruit about the size of a golf ball. And deer and other wildlife absolutely love them. There's a few things to remember about the American persimmon. First of all, they're either a male or a female tree. Only the female produces the fruit. The good thing for the whitetail land manager is that you can buy grafted female trees so that every tree you plant is a female and produces fruit. It's a good idea to have some male trees in there too, so you can buy some ungrafted trees and plant with them. What I really like to do with these trees is plant them around the edges of my food plots. It just helps to create more drawing power to that plot. Not only do you have that crop that you planted in that plot, but you've got those persimmon trees around the edge that deer absolutely love. It'll just turn your plot into a deer magnet when that fruit is ripe. And by the way, if you ever tasted a persimmon when it's green, they are as absolute bitter as anything you've ever tasted. But once they turn ripe later in the fall, they are sweet as can be. They drop real slow so that a lot of times there's still fruit hanging on the tree in January. So they're slowly dropping throughout the entire hunting season, and deer just continue to come and look for those persimmons that have fallen. Persimmons are more of a southern tree than they are a northern tree, but they can still grow well into southern Michigan and southern Wisconsin. So if you live in a more northern region, I would suggest you just plant a few trees at first to see how they fare with your winters. But different varieties can take the cold different. So just experiment a little bit. And if you can get persimmons to grow on your property, you're absolutely going to attract the whitetails. So now I've shared with you what I consider the 3 most overrated tree species for whitetail land managers, as well as 3 of my favorite species. Now everything that I've shared has been a mass producing tree, either fruit or nuts, hard mast. There's a lot of other tree species that the whitetail land manager needs to be familiar with. In my years working as a conservation tree planter, I probably planted over 100 different tree species. Stick around, be sure to subscribe to this channel, click the notification bell, and as time goes by, we're going to be sharing a whole lot more information about trees for wildlife habitat.